I save narrow scraps of wood like this, not because I'm cheap or because I'm a wood hoarder. I save them because you can do a lot with a scrap of wood. Here's an example. Every woodworker has to glue up panels from time to time, and the better you align the seams between the boards, the less material you'll have to sand or plane away to flatten your panel back out when it's dry. This is especially critical if you're working with 3/4 inch thick boards and you need a 3/4 inch thick panel. You don't have a lot of room for error. You can use biscuits to help keep the seams aligned as you clamp them together, as long as you have a good, accurate biscuit joiner. We made a video about that recently. I'll link to it below this video so you can check it out. You might even cut a groove down the mating edges of your boards and slip in a strip of 1/8 inch hardboard to create a spline. Biscuits and splines will also strengthen an edge joint, but frankly, glue alone will make these types of joints strong enough. The quickest solution for misaligned seams is to use cauls that you make yourself from scraps of wood you've been saving, and they'll work best if you modify them a bit before you clamp them on. In this video, I'll show you 3 ways to do it. One for small panels, another for medium panels, and a third for large glue-ups. First, let's talk about those scraps again. Pine works perfectly fine for making cauls, but if you make them from hardwood, you can sometimes get away with using narrower strips. The larger the panel you're gluing up, the stiffer the strips will need to be. So whatever wood you're using, make sure it doesn't flex too much for the job. The first method is to make custom cauls for the panel you're working on. You'll need 2 strips of wood that are about 3 inches in width or slightly narrower if you're using hardwood. Lay the boards out as you intend to glue them up and mark the location of each seam in the panel right on your cauls. Use a 1-inch Forstner bit or a hole saw to bore holes down the center of your cauls at each of the points that you marked. Then, rip each one right down the center. You now have 4 cauls. Here's how to use them. Put glue on the edges of your boards, and as you apply light clamping pressure near the middle, carefully align each seams at the center of the panel. Since your boards aren't likely to be perfectly flat, it's difficult to align the entire seam from end to end, but if you get the center flush, you can then use your cauls to deal with the ends. Clamp them on the ends of the boards with the cutouts over the seams. This will force everything into alignment and give you some space for the glue to squeeze out without getting on your cauls. Notice how we use rubber bands to help hold the cauls in place while we apply the clamps. This makes things so much easier. Try it. These types of end cauls are best for smaller panels, such as for cabinet doors. But larger panels require more cauls to align the longer seams between the boards. If the panel is wider than the throat of your clamp, it can also be difficult to get enough pressure in the center of the cauls to force those boards flush. The solution is to make a different type of caul. For this, I need a few strips of wood that are about 2 inches wide. Again, you can go narrower if your cauls are hardwood. I cut my cauls about 6 inches longer than the panel is wide, but I mark on the cauls where the edges of the panels will fall. Next, I put on a strip of blue tape from mark to mark. Then a second strip that starts and stops about 1 inch short of the ends of the first strip. Then a third that falls about 1 inch short of the ends of the previous one, and so on until I end up with a piece a few inches wide in the center. The tape has modified the edge, creating an arc, so the caul is gradually thicker towards the center. Now as the cauls naturally bend to the pressure of the clamps on the ends, you'll maintain pressure in the center of the panel as well. This process works well with medium-sized panels, such as for small tables and cabinet tops. But if you're gluing up really wide panels, such as for a countertop or a full-size dining table, you'll need to apply this curved edge principle a little bit differently. For one thing, you'll need thicker cauls, perhaps even 2x4s. And you'll need an arc in the edge as well. It's not practical to create this more dramatic arc with tape because multiple layers of tape will make it too squishy to apply even pressure. Instead, you may cut the arc on the edge of the caul itself. A good way to do this is to rip about 1/8 inch strip from a knot-free edge. Drive a small nail close to each end, about 1/8 or 1/4 inch back from the edge you wish to curve, depending on how long the caul is, because longer cauls require a more substantial curve than shorter ones. The nails will help you hold the ends of your strip as you bend it back toward the edge, creating a template for you to trace a nice gradual arc. Finally, you can use a bandsaw or a jigsaw or even just a belt sander to form your edge to that line. Since these curved cauls lack cutouts over the panel seams, you should apply a layer of tape and some good paste wax to the edge so they won't stick to the glue. Cauls make glue ups a lot easier and your panels will come out flatter. You can make them yourself from scraps you've been hoarding, and you can save them to reuse them many times. Who says you can't get track saw quality cuts from a simple circular saw? Boratool's new WTX clamp edge guide system is light, it's easily portable, and it's far less expensive. And with the optional router and jigsaw attachments, the system's more versatile too. Check it out at the link in the notes below this video. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.